Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof, the 15th of June 2024. This might be my last video of the day. I do have all my content for the Geopolitics video to share with you, but I don't know if I'll have time to do it, given that I'm going up to give this talk. So yeah, I may get that video out, I may not. Right, as I said in my previous video, every night it seems that the Ukrainians do send drones and sometimes missiles and whatnot over into Russian territory, but we don't always know about what has taken place. In this case, we have some FIRMS data. So FIRMS is the NASA wildfire data that they get from space, looking down at the world, working out where there are big hot fires that take place over some time, and then that flags up on the FIRMS data. And it's been really useful for working out what's been going on in the war. Well, actually, this data is now coming through of that there was a hit last night. Exactly what I was saying. There will be stuff that filters through. Thank goodness people check out the FIRMS data on a nightly basis. But anyway, among the many unsung exploding Russian factory complexes that just happen to be within Ukrainian drone striking distance is this huge concrete plant in Bryansk. Satellite heat data confirming catastrophic 3:30 a.m. infernos engulfing the area. No air defenses means no Russia, says Jay in Kiev. So Bryansk is the oblast. You've got Bryansk, Kursk and Belgorod. It's over the border there. Something has been hit and it seems to be fairly hot. So that's that. Anyway, on to military aid and other assistance to Ukraine. We start with Ukraine will receive $1.5 billion euros in July from profits of frozen Russian assets. Quote, Ukraine is expected to receive the funds in July 2024, 90% that will be used for military needs, 10% for recovery. That's to appease Austria and Hungary and possibly, well, not Switzerland, actually, they're not in the EU. But the Ministry of Finance of Ukraine report. So that is coming from the EU, from frozen, I think it's from the EU, from frozen, that's why you got the 90% frozen Russian assets and the profits from there. Now, I was under the impression that they were due to get like 1.9 billion of that, was it, in June? I don't know if that's not taking place and maybe it's had to be moved back, but nonetheless, that's good news. Okay. And then big news about Kamala Harris and the peace summit that's just starting. So Zelensky's turned up. There's an awful lot of big leaders from an awful lot of countries at the Swiss Ukrainian peace summit. And at that, US has announced the allocation of more than $1.5 billion to strengthen the Ukraine's energy sector, address humanitarian needs and enhance security. I don't know where that's coming from. It was announced by Vice President Kamala Harris. Now, if you remember, there's a really big fundraiser for the Democrats that Joe Biden is going to be at tonight. He's had a heavy schedule recently. Zelensky just has an insane schedule. So Kamala Harris, that's why she's there representing the US. Ammunition from the Prague-led, so the Czech initiative has arrived or is arriving in Ukraine, according to the foreign minister. Ammunition provided under the Czech-led initiative is arriving there, says Jan Lipavsky. I don't know whether there's the Estonian initiative that was one that has highlighted further ammunition available around the world, whether that is something that's going to take place as well, or whether they've essentially let the Czechs know and it all becomes part of the one initiative, and the more money they get, the more ammunition they can get to Ukraine. But is no doubt already making a significant difference. I see more artillery being used, certainly than there was some months ago. Now, we had Ramstein, we've had the Czech we've had the Swiss Peace Summit, we've had the G7, so much going on. We had Normandy. US and allied countries should increase the supply of weapons to Ukraine, said US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. According to him, the war in Ukraine has entered a key stage. I said this yesterday, but it's worth repeating. He also responded to Putin's peace proposal, saying that Putin has no right at all to impose peace conditions on Ukraine. So when you add all this kind of stuff up, where you've got Kamala Harris saying $1.5 billion to help strengthen reconstruction, and you've got Czech initiative ammunition coming through. You've got Lloyd Austin saying we need to ramp up the supply of weapons to Ukraine, and a peace proposal's a load of bunkum. And you've got G7 providing stuff, and you've got the US looking at, well, their bilateral security agreement, although no one can quite agree on how legally binding that is and what it really entails. But there was talk about multiple squadrons of jets. Things are looking, very positive for the Ukrainians, you would argue, and that's probably why Putin has come out, since there's this peace summit now, with the attempt to get negotiations started. I mean, I don't think anyone was under any illusions that it was never going to happen. The demands from Russia were laughable, but I think it shows that actually Russia are in a pretty difficult position at the moment. We are working hard to ensure that Ukraine receives the F-16s this summer, said Lloyd Austin as well. And I think, I'm optimistic that this will happen. But however, so that's the F-16s. We now know that France are providing 6 Mirage 2000-5. They are also in many air forces around the world, these Mirages. Mirages in general, the 2000-5, I don't know how many, but certainly Greece are one of them. Greece have said they're not yet ready to let Ukraine have those. They wouldn't quite have enough trainers and people as well. They're receiving new airframes themselves from the US, but anyway, unfortunately it doesn't look like it's going to happen. Quote, we have been big supporters of Ukraine from our excess defense equipment, and to the extent that we can continue to do that, we will. But when you start talking about fighter jets, you move the discussion into a different league, and we're not there. So unfortunately, they aren't going to get those from Greece. There was talk, because France could only provide 6, they still use them themselves. So it's not like offloading an old obsolete fleet. But they are going to give 6, and then the question is, well, what other nations would be able to provide some? Ex-NATO commander calls for the further lifting restrictions on Ukrainian strikes against Ukraine, which is against Russia. Sorry, we've heard this a lot from politicians and analysts, so it's really useful to have a NATO, or at least a former NATO commander, talk about this as well. Ukraine should be allowed to use Western weapons to strike as deep inside Russia as it is necessary, including targeting power plants, Wesley Clark, NATO's former Supreme Commander in Europe, said on June 14th. That's significant. This is a big guy saying a really big thing. That's like including power plants. In May, the US allowed Ukraine to use HIMARS, multiple launch rocket launchers, Gimlet's rockets and artillery against Russian territory near Kharkiv and Sumy oblasts. However, Washington still prohibits Ukraine from using ATACMS, 300-kilometer missiles and other long-range US supplied weapons to strike deeper inside Russia. Okay, sticking on NATO, Germany will host NATO command for coordinating assistance to Ukraine, the alliance's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has said. According to him, NATO will coordinate the transfer of repair of military equipment and, quote, provide support to the long-term development of Ukraine's armed forces. Thus, the alliance will take on a greater role of coordinating arms supplies to Ukraine. This is something that has been on the cards because of everyone being worried. And I know some people in America will go, blah, 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 big supporters of Donald Trump or whatever. But everyone else around the world who's a supporter of Ukraine are deeply worried about a possible Donald Trump victory in November 2024. And NATO have been looking to pick up some of the slack that might be left, or at least actually proactively mitigate against such an election result. So they are looking on taking on. People were wanting NATO to take on the Ramstein defense group. So that's a 50 allies. That's organized by the Americans. NATO was saying, well, we should probably take that on because, what happens if Trump gets in? That doesn't look like it's going to happen, but NATO are doing other things. So coordination center in Germany, and then starting to coordinate themselves more of the aid packages coming to Ukraine. NATO is somewhat ring-fenced from the election in terms of Congress passed themselves proactively recognizing that Donald Trump doesn't like NATO. Congress, bipartisan support for this, passed some legislation that would mean that Trump couldn't unilaterally take the US out of NATO. I think it would probably need a supermajority or something like that in Congress. And so that's really good news. So there are things in place to stop Donald Trump he was going to go down that route, doing something destructive for the US's military strategy and geopolitical strategy, and also for NATO there. So these efforts do not make NATO a party to the conflict, but they will enhance our support to Ukraine to uphold its right to self-defense, Stoltenberg said. US President Joe Biden said on Thursday, quote, China is not supplying weapons, but the ability to produce those weapons and the technology available to do it. So it is, in fact, helping Russia, which is what we know. It depends how you define lethal equipment, right? So the components for lethal equipment, okay, they're providing them, but not the actual finished products. But then they are getting like body armor and helmets and drones, and calling the drones like agricultural drones. So yeah, it is a bit of a grey area, isn't it? Right, protecting military trainers in the event they're deployed back into Ukraine is a primary concern of Canadian defence planners as France steps up pressure on allies to join its training initiative, Canada's top military commander said. So this is coming from CBC Canadian News, but French aid to Ukraine here is synopsizing it. So, okay, what's going on? Well, we have the coalition that France is trying to put together to get allied trainers training inside Ukraine to make it more efficient and beneficial for the Ukrainians. This is all very controversial, of course, because it means that there will be allied troops or allied personnel inside Ukraine. The reality is there already is. Like UK Special Forces are there, French Special Forces are probably there, American Special Forces are almost certainly there, doing X, Y, and Z. Not like doing missions themselves, but training, advising, gaining intelligence, putting together missions, no doubt. There will be more people operating in Ukraine than we realise, and generally, and this so. It wouldn't be a huge change, but they would then become a vulnerability, as in they would become a very high level target for the Russians. Sorry, much needed tea break. Okay, as a result, here it says, quote, Chief of the Defence Staff General Wayne Eyre received a briefing on the training mission from his French counterpart following D-Day commemoration ceremonies last week. In early June, Chief of the Defence Staff of France, General Thierry Burkhard, sent letters to roughly 10 countries inviting them to join multinational coalition to train the military in Ukraine. Canadian defence officials would not confirm whether Canada had received one of the letters, but said no decision had been made on participation in the French-led initiatives. This is interesting. So 10 nations have been formally approached by the sounds of it. I hope that those nations agree to work with the Ukrainians in Ukraine. Now, military aid to Ukraine has been updated here by Jeff2416. It sounds a bit random, but he's actually a really good source, OSINT source on support to Ukraine on Twitter. He has updated his document, open source document, with some Dutch provision. So if you go back to my last video, I was saying actually there have been hundreds of vehicles. There's 700 vehicles, military vehicles provided to Ukraine over the past few months or whatever. Like the West is really ramping up support while Russia is struggling with their stockpiles. Here we've got 37 YPR 765 armor personnel carriers. These are the upgraded M113, the American M113 that the Dutch have upgraded, that we've seen very active in Ukraine over the course of the war anyway. So they are getting some more of them from the Netherlands. An unknown number of M109 155mm self-propelled guns, which variant this was not mentioned. So that's great news. And then 11 assaulted small boats as well from the Dutch. That's really good news. They are massive supporters of Ukraine at present. Now, also, we have an update from Jeff with some Irish equipment. Now, Ireland are a neutral nation, so they can't provide military equipment to Ukraine. So what they do is provide humanitarian equipment that is really useful, or I guess equipment that can be used in logistics and stuff like that. So under the guise of, say, humanitarian aid. So here's a bunch of trucks, good luck with using them for whatever. It could be that kind of stuff. Anyway, they have delivered 2 DOK ING MV4 mine clearance systems, and they've also pledged one Iveco Astra M320 recovery vehicle, 7 heavy transport trucks, either Iveco Astra M320s or Scania P124CBs, for those who care. Right. The question is that enough? Is Ireland doing enough? I know there are people who are quite critical of Ireland. In fact, Thomas Tyner is very critical of the Irish Defence Force as being not fit for purpose in terms of their own defence. This is as a result of stuff happening off island, as in the Atlantic Ocean to the west, where Russia are doing all sorts of stuff, and there's a claim that Ireland aren't really in a position to do anything about it. They need to really up their own defence forces. But anyway, I'd be interested to see what my Irish viewers have to say about your feelings of Irish support for Ukraine. I think it's there in a kind of abstract political sense, but it could be that the Irish just don't have a lot of stuff. Well, okay, how about financial contributions, or is that all coming through the EU? What's the situation? Let me know what you think about Ireland's support for Ukraine. Update from Brussels that Canada will send a new package of military aid to Ukraine, including CRV-7 rocket motors. I talked about that yesterday. They're 2,300, these rockets. It calls them rocket motors. I presume it's just a whole rocket going. These, I think, are unguided. They used to be fairly long range, unguided rockets that you'd use off fixed wing aircraft, I think. So there's 80,000 of them, and Canada are given 2,300. So Ukraine is saying, hey, it doesn't matter what condition they're in, we'd like all 80,000, please. Then Nanook remote weapon systems, small arms ammunition. We're also beginning to ship a new fleet of 50 armoured vehicles, says Bill Blair. He's a defence minister, with 4 departing London this week, which we've already heard about. Those are the 4 armoured personnel carriers that have been done out as medevac vehicles. Okay, it was announced today, says German aid to Ukraine, that 5 Toyota pickups, which were financed by the German government, are handed over to the National Guard of Ukraine. The pickups will be used by mobile teams to protect critical infrastructure. Handover of further vehicles is planned. I mean, yep, this is just a small thing happening, but it's worth remembering this kind of stuff happens all the time. You've got NAFO trucks getting sent to Ukraine all the time. This really helps. And then the question is, well, is this happening with Russia? How many times are Russia getting keys handed to them from allied nations supporting them in such a way as this? And I don't think it's a fair parallel there at all. Right, Ukraine's permanent representative to the UN, Serhiy Kistalitsia, called on countries to track those who recruit foreigners to sign a contract with the Russian army. So, in other words, the countries that I previously mentioned, your Nepals and Indias and Cuba, so on and so forth. Is anyone tracking them? Countries, can you track these yourselves? Can you keep a handle on it? Because this is not helping. Actually, Russia are getting quite a large proportion. I don't know how much, but it seems like a large proportion of their troops from outside of Russia. I think it's a form of klepto-mobilization where they're sort of stealing them from other countries or attracting them, like the child catcher in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, where they're just like going around the world going, oh, look at what things we can give you. Would you like a student visa? Yes, you can have a student visa. Come into my little cage. Oh, you're in the army now. Oh, you're dead. Oh, you didn't get your student visa. That appears to be Russia's approach. And here we have footage of a whole bunch of T-62M tanks on the way to the front line, one would presume. I don't know the provenance of this, time, place, but I presume I've not seen this one before. I presume it's recent, especially since they've got cope cages on top. So there's definitely going to be something from the last couple of years, right? Old tanks getting refurbished. Is this what's popping out of the manufacturing facilities? Is this what they can manage at the moment? Although this might look bad, Kemerovo region, reportedly, a whole bunch of tanks. How many of these, and what their fire control systems like inside? How able are they, and where are their T-90Ms? Where are we seeing a long train of, really properly decent? Now, it's not to say the T-62M upgraded might be able to do, if it is upgraded, we don't even know that, might be able to do a fair job, but surely it can do better. In fact, you can tell it's T62, they've got 5 wheels, haven't they, there. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Really appreciate your support. Take care. Speak soon. Toodle pips.